morning. Good morning and welcome. Good morning. It's almost like you were mic'd, Steve. It's like you were a judge or something at one time. Welcome to this second part in a two-part series with our Buhler Grade School principal, Melissa Kennedy. Last week, I think she gave us an incredibly engaging piece of work that started reintroducing us with our ACEs, and more generally what the Buhler Grade School is doing for their students and with the teachers. And I think I heard a lot of good comments about that. If you missed it or you want to go back and revisit some of those themes, that video is up on our YouTube channel. You can go just Google BMC YouTube channel and it should come up, or Buhler Mennonite Church YouTube channel and it should come up. And just to put a plug in, you can go to our new website, buhlerchurch.org or .com, and go to galleries and click on videos, and it will direct you exactly where you need to go. So there is no excuse in not passing the test next Sunday. Next Sunday we bring in Kathy Berkey-Weens, who will talk about our Safe Sanctuaries policy. If you work with children here in Buhler Mennonite Church and you're not teaching that Sunday, please attend. It is part of our commitment to once a year revisit our Safe Sanctuaries policy and work on that to make sure it's in the forefront of our minds. Heavenly Father, now open Melissa's mouth to speak. Continue to give her the boldness and the clarity to speak to us prophetically on what is going on in our community and how it might be that we can join you at work, join the school at work, join this community at work to make this indeed a nurturing place, a thriving place, living life to its fullest as you have intended it to be. Be here now with us in our hearing. Amen. Melissa, welcome. Let's welcome her again to this place. And
thank you. Good morning. I'm glad to be back. And I'm not going to... Yesterday I spent developing slides for today, and I don't have an extra 2 hours worth. I consolidated it, so hopefully I'll get through all of it. And one of the things that I wanted to do, because I did listen to last week's, because hindsight's kind of 20/20, and I wanted to go back and revisit some of the things that I talked about and how we can move further with those things. And as I did, I wanted to really talk about trauma again. And I want you to understand, we know that we have those 10 things on the ACE questionnaire that we talked about last week. Trauma is not exclusive to those 10 things. And I think that we need to realize there's many other things. And that study was over 20 years ago. And think about how much our society has changed in the past 20 years. So we have to realize there's more than just those 10 things. There's many other things that constitute trauma, not just for adults, but especially for our kids. And as we move forward and we talk about what our community can do and what as a church community and as a Buhler community can do to support not only our kids but the families that we have, is that we have to remember when we have a tendency to judge that these parents of these kiddos, I can pretty much guarantee you have their own trauma that has been unresolved and unrecognized, that they have not gotten help for. They've never had the resiliency skills embedded into them, which is what we're constantly trying to do with our kids. So I think we have to really stop when we want to judge and stop and think about what has the parent themselves been through. I think that's very, very important for us to do. And just a little side note here, because years ago, Ruby Page, she's an author and works with children, and she wrote this book called The Framework of Poverty. And it really talks about families in poverty and their perception of the world that we live in, but also their perception of those of us that are not. And what our efforts to help them, how they come across to them. So that's another thing I kind of wanted. It's pride in poverty is what I call it. So we have to stop and think about that as well. So I want to talk about these things that are actually happening in Buhler. And it's one of those things, I'm on the Buhler Community Foundation board, and we had a retreat in January or February, we had a retreat. And at that retreat, we started talking about grant opportunities within our schools and within our community. And I brought up the fact that what can we do to help our families that are homeless? And I have to tell you, I saw some pretty big eyes, and I saw some jaws drop. You don't know what you don't know. And Wilmer said this last week, and I don't know what borscht are, so I don't know. What are they? Is it like sausage or something? I don't know. Soup. Borscht is soup. Okay, so now I know. Didn't know, but he talked about how we all have our little campfires, and we're all cooking our own borscht, and we're not all getting together and making one big pot of it. And I think when I spoke at the foundation that day to the board, and we started talking about this, I think we're all guilty of that. We all do it. We all worry about our own little world and what's going on in it. I have a tendency to do that. And I'll tell you, I have a friend, and he always says, yeah, I know. Buhler Grade School. You're only going to worry about Buhler Grade School. I'm not going to worry about anything else. I do worry about other things, but in the realm of things, we talk about our world and what impacts it. And we don't look at the bigger picture so often. And all of these things we are witness to at Buhler Grade, and these are all people that live in our community. So therefore, we can all be witnesses to this as well. But we have a tendency to worry about what's happening right here. So I'm going to share the story that I shared with them that day. And that was this, because this had just happened. It happened in late January. I had a little girl. They were new to our district. And she had a fever. And we couldn't get a hold of anyone. We couldn't get a hold of a parent. So she has her mom and her mom's significant other, boyfriend. Couldn't get hold of anybody, and she needed to go home. She was sick. So I decided I would take her home. So I got on Google Maps and found out where she lived. And as I'm driving her there, she says, well, I live in a barn, you know. Well, I'm thinking, cool. Like, I love how people take barns and turn them into houses, right? So as we're driving and we get to her neighborhood, I said, well, you're going to have to point out where you live, because the address wasn't coming up right. And she was sitting there, and she said, well, you know, we don't have water. I said, oh, you don't? And I said, so how are you taking a bath? And she said, in a tote. So in a big plastic tote is how she was taking her bath. So we get there, and she points to a garden shed. She said, that's where I live. So I walk her to the door, and we walk inside, and it's plywood on the inside, but off to the side was a little closet. And the mom came out of that little closet with her baby, who was approximately probably 6 months old. And inside that closet, which was small, was nothing but blankets. Now, this is January, mind you. That's where they were basically living, in that closet. This baby, this little girl, and her mom, and her mom's boyfriend. Now, of course, and I have to tell you, what struck me first of all is when the mom came out, she was appalled that her principal, the principal at her daughter's school, was seeing her living conditions. And I was flabbergasted. Of course, I didn't address it. I talked to the mom and said, you know, she had a fever and she really needed to come home. She couldn't be around other kids. And I left, and I had interviews that afternoon already scheduled. And needless to say, I was like, what can we do? Like, it's cold. That space heater. And that was it. So I proceeded to get the credit card out and get a hotel for them for the weekend. This was on a Friday. Got a hold of school, went to the food pantry here, got food together, left a message and said, I have reservations for you at this hotel for the weekend. And I knew they had free breakfast at the hotel as well. I knew they had a hot shower. And that evening, I took the food that we had gathered from the food pantry and I delivered it. And when I got to the room, again, she was appalled to see me. And one of her things was, we're not poor. And I don't want you to take my kids away from me. Because automatically, previously, prior to that experience, I would have just called DCF and put it in their hands. But you have to remember you're pulling them away. And we think we have the right to judge and say, well, obviously you're poor, right? Or you wouldn't be living in a garden shed. But we can't. I had to tell myself as I was driving home that night, after I delivered those things in Hutchinson to the hotel room, they're doing the best they can with what they know and what they already have. And that's hard. Because we look at ourselves, but then we have to sit back and think, I have resources. I have resiliency. I have a support system. I know that that's never going to happen to me or my kids because we have people that are going to take care of us no matter what. I know that if the very worst thing happens, I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to stray just a little bit, and I know I'm terrible about this. And I do. But as I was putting this presentation together, I was talking about resiliency, and I was going through all the things, because I talked to you a little bit about that year 2015 in my life. What I didn't tell you, and I'll expand on it a little bit, is my oldest daughter and the fact that she is an opiate addict. She's recovering. So that was all just, it was a whirlwind of craziness. But right after my husband died, one of the things that I did that got me through, because a lot of people will say, oh, you're really strong. Not really. I'm grateful. Because when my husband first died and I'm laying there thinking, okay, we have a $1,200 a month house payment and I bring home $2,400 a month and I have to get insurance for my family now and I'm not going to be able to do this. I started thinking there's got to be a way for me to move past this and start finding there's going to be something, because they always say you have to find the good in it. And I had to find some way to take Mike's death and make it good in my life. I had to find a way to make myself better. And how I survived when I couldn't sleep, when I would wake up in the middle of the night with anxiety, is like, okay, I would always, how many of you do this? When something happens, you play out the worst case scenario in your mind. We all do that, the worst case scenario. So it's like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it. So let's play out what's the very worst thing that could happen to me right now. Well, the very worst thing that was going to happen is I was going to lose my house. I was going to have to move in with my mom at the age of 50. That was the worst case scenario. But I knew that I had people that were going to take care of me. And I started just being grateful. I started like, I'm so grateful my kids had a great dad who loved them to grow up with. Because by that time they were, early 20s. I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful that I have this community that has wrapped us up and given us all this support. I just started doing that every morning before I got up. I was like, okay, if my feet are going to hit the ground and I'm going to make any headway on this day, I've got to find a way to be grateful. And I still do that, and now I've got it in I've instilled it in my kids, as my son will call. He lives in D.C. He's a little dramatic. People that work with me know that because I talk about him all the time. Because he has a pretty stressful job, but he'll call like, bemoan all these horrible things that are happening in his life. And I said, okay, here's the deal. What's the worst case scenario? What's the very worst thing that could happen to you? And can you live with that? Because if you can live with that, you're going to be just fine. And if it means moving in with me, which I don't want, you could live with that. And I could too. So as I go through these slides and I talk about resiliency and I talk about trauma in our kids and I just share this story about this little girl that's living in the garden shed, let's really take a moment as we go through this, because I know I did it yesterday as I was putting this together. I am so grateful for so many things every day. And when we focus on those things, then we truly can find out things don't matter. Gosh, did I learn that so much. I had a big, beautiful home. But all the things that I was grateful for after my husband died had nothing to do with material things, ever. I've learned so much. Minimalist attitude. I'm working on it. I don't need stuff. I need people. I need relationships. I need love. But I don't need things. Okay, so all of these things, when I talk about this little gal living in the garden shed, it was an eye-opening experience for all of us. But I also found out a lot about the poverty mindset. And that was, we're fine. We're going to take care of this. We have this under control. But what they didn't have is resiliency, because they didn't have a lot of the things that we take for granted. Excuse me. So all of these things are happening in our community. I want to talk a little bit about what the ACE study showed us and some statistics here. Now, if you look at the ACE score from 0 to 4, and this is adult alcoholism, because we talked about how it impacts the body, how trauma impacts the body, childhood trauma. Adult alcoholism, based on an ACE score. Now, this is 4. Now, you have to remember my husband had an ACE score of 6. And as we talk about disease, as I was researching yesterday, doing a little bit, I started thinking about his sister and his brother. His brother was an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic, but an alcoholic. And his sister, his older sister, has lupus. Now, so lupus is an autoimmune disease, which I'm sure most of you know. So it's like, I wonder what's been done about ACEs and lupus or autoimmune disease. Well, guess what I found out? There's so many connections. Like the autoimmune disease, like the percentage of autoimmune disease in people with high ACE scores is overwhelming. Overwhelming. And I sent her a text yesterday because she's kind of been through all this with me, and she's like, well, we should have known that. Like, wow, like we should have known that. And so, of those 3 kids living in a way above poverty home that still had a lot of trauma in it, they were all adversely affected in adulthood. And so childhood experiences chronic depression. You can see how much higher it is with an ACE score of 4 or more. Like, of the people, the adults that surveyed, over 60% with an ACE score of 4 or more had chronic depression. Antidepressant prescriptions. My husband was on anti-anxiety medication. His sister's on anti-anxiety medication. And so is his younger brother. Because the thing about trauma is what it does to our brain, because it's cortisol overload, which is that's that chemical in our body that makes the fight, flight, or freeze. And when that's constantly activated, it affects the rest of our body. So, once again, there's that statistic. Then we talk about domestic violence. Perpetrators of domestic violence, same thing. Look at the difference. And what I love about data, which as an educator you learn all about data because you deal with it all the time, is that it tells the tale, and you can't lie about this. You can't say this is made up. This is proof. This was a study. This was research-based. This is what it is. Liver disease, extremely high, of course, because you're thinking alcoholism. Yep. Smoking as an adult goes up significantly with an ACE score of 6 or more in particular. Being raped, look at the difference here with an ACE score of 4 or more. Promiscuous activity. Suicide attempts, significantly higher. Teen sexual behaviors. The middle one there is teen pregnancy, but you also have intercourse by age 15, and then you have teen paternity. Impaired worker performance. And one of those I saw, it was like the middle one is serious financial problems. And I think it's another one of those things, and I think about poverty when I think about this too. I remember back when I was a classroom teacher, and we would have people in poverty, and I even think about it now with some of the students that we have, and we think, well, I see you with a brand new cell phone, and I see you have, I heard you got a big screen TV, and I know that you smoke, and so you're spending money on cigarettes, but you aren't meeting the most basic needs of your kids. And sometimes that's really hard for us to grasp. But you have to understand that possessions are a big thing for people that live in poverty. They want the things that you and I can afford to have. So when they get the money to have them, maybe it makes them feel a little bit better about where they are in life to have those things. That's a paradigm shift too, and it's hard. And even the little gal in the garden shed. Like, okay, well, what are you doing? Like, how are you not, why aren't you going to a shelter? Well, that's another problem we have. Shelters are full. It's hard to get them in. We tried to get them into a shelter that day, and we couldn't because they were full and it was cold. So let's talk about a little bit about resilience and what it is. So resilience is the process of adapting in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress, such as family and relationship problems, serious health problems, or workplace and financial stressors. It means bouncing back from difficult experiences. And so I go back to my own story, and back home, like people say, oh, you were just so strong after your husband died. I wasn't really that strong. I got strength from my community. I got strength from my faith. I got strength from the gratitude that I decided to pull in and hold close to me on those days when I didn't think that I wanted to keep going or was trying to figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. So as we go through these, I listed, there's 14 resilience factors. So when you do the ACE study, you get your ACE score. And then you can do this resilience questionnaire, so the ACE questionnaire or the resilience questionnaire, and it tells you what your resiliency factor is. Like, what is your ability to pick yourself up and to move on after trauma or stress or tragedy? And so I want to go through these factors, and I want you to, number one, I want you to think about yourself, but number two, I want you to think about, because now when I look at kids, I think about these things. And I think about my husband a lot. Because I can tell you right now that these first two, no, I don't think he didn't really believe that they loved him. Number one, they didn't tell him, and number one, they didn't really show him. I believe that my mother loved me when I was little, and I believe that my father loved me when I was little. Now, I want you to know those are two separate resiliency factors. And it's very important to distinguish that, because you can know that your mother loves you and she can take care of you and provide you all the things that you have, but you have two parents. Rejection by one can be just as damaging as rejection by both. So we have to make sure that these are two separate resiliency factors. They're not put together. Just know, and I look at my kiddos that really struggle, and I think, number one, do they have a parent? Are they living with their parents? And if they are, do they know that they're loved by them? And it's foreign to us because that's just the way that we are. It's what we do. We love our kids. We prioritize things for our kids. We sacrifice for our kids. These next two, when I was little, other people helped my mother and father take care of me, and they seemed to love me. This is called a support system. Now, my little gal in the garden shed, they have no support system here. They have no relatives that I'm aware of. And I think that some of the relationships they did have that could have been a support system have since strayed. They have no one to count on. If I need something, I know, first of all, I have a whole family at Buhler Grade that I could call. Just here, I'm just talking about me living here in Buhler. I'm not even talking about back home, where I came from. I'm talking about living right here in Buhler. I know I have a support system here. And I know that there's people that if I have a need, they're going to take care of it. Because we have a relationship, and we know one another. And I know that they will do that. But what if you lived here? What if you moved here and you didn't have the funds to live in anything other than a garden shed, and you had no one to call? And pride's going to stop you from calling. We can never the gratitude thing, that support system is so big. It's so big. And we have to look at what our role is in being that support system. And I think I've heard that when I was an infant, someone in my family enjoyed playing with me, and I enjoyed it too. I babysat my granddaughter yesterday. She's 5 months old. Now, we have my daughter and her husband were at a wedding. Now, they have the little video monitor, right? And of course, I spent my entire day. That's all I did, right? Just take care of my granddaughter because she's so much fun right now. She's 5 months old. But I looked at that monitor and I'm like, okay, we know if she cries in the middle of the night, someone's going to take care of her. Someone's going to be there for her. How many kids don't get that? I think about my husband, and he talked about when he got put to bed at night, it was like, go to bed. It wasn't, I'm going to read you a book. I'm going to kiss you and hug you and tell you I love you. We're going to kneel down and say prayers. It wasn't any of those things. It was go to bed. And there's something called pre-verbal trauma that I want to talk just a little bit about. And we would like to think that, well, if it happened before you can remember that it happened, then it doesn't count. That's not true. I talked last week about the little 5-year-old kiddo that we had in kindergarten, 5 years old, the oldest of 5, with an ACE score of 9. Don't for a minute think that the things that happened to him as an infant, which was probably a lot of crying because when kids cry and their needs aren't met, they don't build that trust factor of knowing someone's always going to be there for me. And that's so big. So like I said, I was looking at my granddaughter yesterday and well, every need that she has is met. Always. She's going to get fed when she's hungry. She's going to get her diaper changed when she needs it. And when she cries, someone's going to soothe her. Who's soothing our kids that don't have anyone there to do that? Or are too preoccupied with addiction or hopelessness or depression or mental illness to attend to their needs? Pre-verbal trauma has an impact. It goes with them. It affects them internally. And you've seen that with what I've talked about when I show the statistics. And I think about that little 5-year-old kiddo that we have. And as hard as we're working to build resiliency in him, I don't know how much can you overcome? How much can we negate the things that have already happened to him? 2 more of these. When I was a child, there were relatives in my family who made me feel better if I was sad or worried. Support system. Think about family gatherings that you have on holidays and think about that huge support system that you have. And I'm not even talking about mom and dad, I'm talking about siblings and cousins and nieces and nephews. And gosh, we're so lucky because we have that. But addiction and the hopelessness that comes with it, and with mental illness, many of these people, I'm thinking about my little family that live in the garden shed, and I'm thinking, what do they do on holidays? They're not eating a ham with sweet potatoes on the side. What are they? We had another. I have to tell this story too. We had these 2 kiddos come to us, not this past year, but the year before, and they had been living in a tent in a park when they got put into foster care. They didn't know how to use eating utensils, really, because everything they ate came out of a container of some kind. It was either finger food or it was a sandwich, or we take so many things for granted that these kids that they had. And I want to tell you, when those kids would have a meltdown, you know what they wanted? When they would get escalated, you know what they cry, and what they say when we're trying to calm them down? I want my mom. I just want my mom. So we can sit there and judge and say what we want, but that's what kids want. They want to be loved and accepted by their parents. And no matter how bad the situation was, it's still their mom. And I know I talked about that last week. So, when I was a child, neighbors or my friends' parents seemed to like me. Acceptance by others. This one is probably the biggest when this group and when we think about what our role is. And that is, when I was a child, teachers, coaches, youth leaders, or ministers were there to help me. And I told you last week that when my light bulb came on about my husband and his high ACE score and his early death, and I told you I talked to his sister on the phone, and we went through the ACE questionnaire together, and she said, okay, Melissa, then tell me this. Because she's a school nurse, her husband's a teacher, I mean, her kids are very successful, and the same with Mike, my husband's little brother, same way. She said, so why did we make it? How come we're doing okay then? And I said, okay, well, let's think back to why you're doing okay. I can tell you why my husband's did okay, and that is because he had a coach who saw what was happening, took him more or less under his wing, him and his wife. They washed his football uniform because the coach was complaining because his football uniform wasn't clean. Well, mom and dad were out getting drunk, and older sister, who's only, a couple years older, really didn't know how to treat spots on white football pants, right? So they started doing little things for him, packing a cooler for him when he went to away games because there wasn't really no food in the house and there was no one there to do that. And that coach changed, in my opinion, the trajectory of Mike's life because he saw the need and he scooped him up. And that coach drives me crazy, by the way. He was a substitute at the school when I was there for 24 years. He retired after I started teaching. And he drives me crazy because I would come home and say, it took me a while to get over the crazy part, because I would come home from work and say, oh my God, Coach Schrader's something again today. And he just talks in circles and drives me nuts. And Mike would say, every word that man says makes perfect sense. Okay. He was hard on Mike, and he had high expectations for him, but he loved him unconditionally, and he took him in. And I talked to Lori, Mike's sister, and I said, so let's think about that. Did you have a support system in place that helped you build that resiliency to move on? They did. Theirs came from their school and some extended family. And that's when it hits home for me, the role that we have as educators. And Wilmer talked last week at the end about stress on our teachers. Self-care is something I'm working on harder with my staff because I'm telling you, it is exhausting. And you can't help but you can't, because when that happened with that little girl in the garden shed, you don't go home and shut it off. You don't walk away from that. It changes you forever. And then we're going to go home and try to be loving and engaged parents when we have this right back here weighing on us. It's stressful, and it takes patience. When I talk about how we deal with kids' escalated behavior, gosh, it takes patience. But if you love kids and you understand trauma, it gives you that patience. It's another gratitude thing. I am grateful every day that I have the patience to make it through something else that happens. And so this is probably a preface for what we need to move forward with when we talk about the blob. And we talk about the things that we can do as a community to help address the problems that we have. We need to really stop and think about this resiliency factor. What can we as a community, a church community, a school community, the Buhler community itself, what can we do? And take that back to gratitude for just a minute. If you have everything you need, and probably much more than you need, let's start thinking about what other people need and being satisfied with what we have. Because that's what I've had to internally do too. I have to be satisfied with, okay, my car's old, but you know what? It works and it's paid for, and I don't need something shiny and new. It serves its purpose. So as we move further along and we have this, what I'm hoping this instigates is a discussion about what we can do and what are some, Wilmer talked last week, we kind of have the long-term goal, the short-term goal, and an immediate goal of what we can do as a community to address some of the needs that we have. 2 more resilience factors. Someone in my family cared about how I was doing in school. Trust me, it doesn't. Or you have traditionally, kind of what I have a tendency to see, parents that, number one, have a lot of trauma themselves, or that are in poverty and are very defensive, don't get really involved until something bad happens. And it can go one of 2 ways. They can be extremely hard on that kid and say, well, they know better than that. And then you worry, okay, what's going to happen to that kid when they get home? Or it's our fault. And putting yourself in the middle of that and trying to focus on the trauma of the parent, the trauma of the kid, and then you mix in the poverty or the mental illness or the addiction and all of those things. There's another point of patience for us. I had a thought and now I lost it. That was really important, and I hope it comes back to me. It did, quickly. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing different at Buhler Grade, which I didn't really talk about last week, which addresses this, and that is we've decided that instead of, when we have issues with a child, instead of pulling parents in and shaming and blaming, and which is what traditionally school has done with kids that have issues, is how can we help you? You are an expert on your child. What can you tell us that will help us help them? What resources do you need connected to that you don't have? Instead of, we have a problem with your child that you need to fix, or this is going to happen and we're going to do out of school suspension and we're going to have these consequences. We've definitely, and I call it a wraparound approach, because we want to scoop them up. We want to help them. They need a friendly face. They need to not feel shamed and blamed. And they already feel shame. They already feel blame. They don't need us putting even more on their plate. We need to give them support. My family, neighbors, and friends talked often about making our lives better. That's us. How can we make lives better? We had rules in our house and were expected to obey them. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about another aspect of poverty that I see. I don't even know I can't necessarily say it's poverty. It's just something I see with parenting right now. And there's something that happened, and it happened shortly after I started teaching. It's this thing called the internet. And trust me, I use it every day. It's part of what I do. It's my job. I'm dependent on it. But it's become apparent for so many of our kids. And I remember, it was last year, I think it was my first year here, it was after like a long weekend, and I went into a classroom and I said, I was asking the kids, so what'd you do this weekend? And one of them said, I played Fortnite from Friday night until Sunday morning, and I didn't even take a nap. No engagement with other humans. Okay, it has become, but you know what? For a parent who's struggling and doesn't either know how to parent or have the time to, or any of those things, technology has become a very good babysitter for our kids. And the possibilities of what they can see and do on the internet are limitless. And it's pretty scary. And when I think about that ACE study and about the fact that it was done 20 years ago, and then I think about, okay, it was about 20 years ago, because when I first started teaching, I know I'm a relic, but we just got computers. They were pretty cool. The things that we could do. And then the internet comes along. And it's explosive. It's like, oh my gosh, everything I need is at my fingertips. Which at first was great for us as adults. But that has spiraled down. I mean, there's little kids with, cell phones, and they have access to everything, and YouTube has become very popular. But that's another big factor that We as educators can't control what happens when kids leave us. Now, try competing with, I don't know anything about Fortnite or Minecraft or any of those things, but try standing up there as a human who spent a whole week on very engaging, dynamic lesson plans. Try competing with that. It's really hard. And then, the stories that they write are about the video games that they play. They create a world based around those games that's so far-fetched from reality and involves no human interaction. It's kind of scary. I could go on and on about that too, but this is a big one. When I felt really bad, I could almost always find someone I trusted to talk to. And so I'm going to talk again about my little gal in the shed. And so, you want to talk to kids. You want to find out what's going on, like what's causing your behaviors and why are you feeling this way and what happened. And they're very honest. But then they also are honest enough to go home and say, yeah, well, Mrs. Kennedy asked this question, and this is what I told her. And pretty soon it's like, ain't none of your beeswax. My mom said that is none of your business, and I'm not going to tell you, because they start to say something, they shut you off. So, becoming that trusted adult, that is what teachers strive to do at Buhler Grade, and I know in all of our district that teachers work hard to be that trusted adult in a kid's life. And I think about some of our kids that are in foster care that have left us now, and the relationships that they have with some of our staff. And when you see them later, like when they've moved on somewhere else, I love seeing that connection. I had a para who sent me a text the other day, and there's 2 kiddos that were in foster care, and she said, I got to see these 2 kids. So exciting. They were so happy to see me. Relationships make all the difference in the world, and I know a couple of those kids, actually the same family, went to a different school. And when I went there one day, I actually got to see them, and they were like, oh, because it's that relationship. They know that they're loved and accepted unconditionally. And I love it when I see kids that leave us but come back. And the other thing, I was at school last week. I know, I'm veering again. I was at school last week, and I had a teacher come and say, well, I see that this kiddo is going to be in the other class, but I already kind of have a relationship with them. It's a kid that's in foster care. I already have a relationship with him. I really would like to, even if it means my class is going to be bigger, I'd really like to have him in my class. It's already started really, and that's what my teachers are doing. Like the year before they have a kid who's got some trauma or has some issues, they're already working really hard, even the year before, to start building that relationship. It makes that transition so much better. And the more relationships they have, I don't want them to just, of course I want them to have that one person. I want them to have a whole school full of people. I want them to know that anybody that works in that building, they can go to them. Wouldn't it be great if we had a community like that? Not just teachers, but trusted adults that they know they can go to, that they can trust. As a youth, people noticed that I was capable and could get things done. This is where resiliency comes in too, because that's what we're trying so hard to do with our kiddos. We're trying to give them the skill set. We're trying to give them strategies to work through their trauma, their stressors, their triggers, and see, because, that pyramid I put up last week about the active engaged learners, and at the top, that's what an active engaged learner is and all the needs that need to be met before they can be there. One of them is just feeling good about yourself. Because even if your basic needs are met, if you don't believe you can do it, and no one else, and you don't think that other people believe you can do it, it still inhibits that active engaged learner from being able to do what they need to do. I was independent and a go-getter. And this one. And you're going to hear a song today. I listened to Kristen practice this morning, and she sings this song called You Say, and I don't know if you've ever heard it, but it's just about believing what people think about you, about yourself. I believe what you say of me is one of the lines in that. Our kids believe what people say about them or what they say to them. So we need to change that language and make it uplifting instead of shaming or blaming. So this is what we know, and overall at Buhler Grade, this is one of our big things. The more healthy relationships a child has, the more likely he will be to recover from trauma and thrive. Relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. I love this. I found it the other day. Did I share it with you, Joe, the other day at school? I don't know if I did or not. But I found this and I was like, gosh, this is perfect. Complaining about a problem without posing a solution is called whining. We do a lot of whining, right? Because we complain about things, but do we ever come up with a solution? That's where I see the blob when we meet. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to stop complaining without coming up with a solution. We need to stop whining. We need to take action if we want to see change. So that's one of my new favorites. So you'll probably see it at Back to School PD. I'm just letting you know. So I talked a lot about gratitude, and I think that needs to be in our hearts as we move forward and think about the next steps that we can take. And I found this, I had this already, but it's like, this isn't just true for kids. This is true for every human. Where did we ever get the crazy idea that in order to make children do better, anyone do better, first we have to make them feel worse? Think of the last time you felt humiliated or treated unfairly. Did you feel like cooperating or doing better? So when I think about our families that are going through all those things I listed at the beginning, homelessness, hopelessness, addiction, poverty, what are we doing? We can't make them feel better by making them feel worse first. We have to empower them. We have to support them. We can't fix everything, but we can support them. And this also, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Because cooking our own borscht isn't going to fix the problem. So I'm going to talk about our blob. And I know I'm already close to running out of time, and I'm terrible about it. These are the things that we've talked about at our blob. I would love for you to come. We are going to find a better name. Although Cindy Couchman came up with a pretty good thing with the acronym, but now I can't remember what it is. But these are some of the things that we've talked about. In the Omega House, I know you've heard about that here, and that is addiction recovery. Now, I'm going to talk just briefly about my daughter, and she is in her 3rd year of recovery from an opiate addiction. She had a car wreck, got prescribed pain pills, then my husband died, and needless to say, it just went downhill from there. But she's doing fabulously. But she also had a lot of resiliency because she had that support system that made all the difference for her. But we talk about the Omega House, and I talked about this with someone I remember, and I'm going to tell you the comment I heard, and it's like, but do we really want one of those in our community? Oh boy, what's that going to bring with it? It's going to bring people that need hope, that need acceptance, and they're probably going to be, because I think David Kay said this, they're like the best neighbors ever. They take care of things. They need to be busy, right? They need to be busy. They take care of things. They have goals. They want to be. They're learning. They're trying to get better. And the hard part for us as educators, and when we look at parents that have addiction, is when a parent goes somewhere for recovery, they get separated from their child or children. Wouldn't it be great if we could come up with a place that's kid-friendly, where we can provide the supports that they need? We can help. What can we do to help this family? How can we help support the kids, make sure they have everything that they need? Because I have more than enough in my life. I can sacrifice a lot. What can we do to help? So I think Omega House, to me, is a very, very exciting prospect for Buhler. Iris. And I don't think that you've talked about Iris. No, you've talked about Care Portal. Iris is, because I'm going to tell you that the system is vast. Because we have DCF, we have St. Francis, we have Horizons, we have all of these different things, these different systems that are in place that deal with some of the problems that we have with kiddos. But how can we connect those things? Because it's kind of confusing. Like, well, St. Francis said this, and then DCF is doing that, and they went to Horizons for this. How can we connect all those things so that as educators and even as a community, well, especially for educators, that we can find out what all the services are, what they're receiving, and how we can best meet the needs of our kids? So that's another big one. Care Portal, that immediate need, because I'm telling you, for example, when I had to whip the credit card out and get a hotel room for 3 nights for that little family, how nice it would have been if we had, because I'm going to put an emergency shelter. Because, and another thing I want to clarify, couch surfing is considered homelessness as well. It's not just, I don't have a house. Couch surfing is considered that. Sleeping in your car, sleeping at a relative's house, those are all considered homelessness. And I really think an emergency shelter that's one of those things that we listed as an immediate need in our community. Family preservation is huge. That particular little family is in Family Pres right now. So I'll tell you that I put off calling DCF a long time because I knew what was going to happen if I called them. They're going to pull those kids away from their parents. And I put it off as long as I possibly could. But I'm glad in a way that I finally did, because I kept giving them time. Give them time. They're going to get this done. They're going to get this done. Because now they're in family preservation, and there is monitoring going on through that to ensure that the needs of the kids are met, but also that they're sticking together. And we have to look at this as supporting and not a handout, because the last thing that people in poverty want is to think that you pity them. Can we support them without shaming and blaming? Just a connecting to resources and the things that we have available right here, and just open hearts to the things that they're going through. Love allows us to develop the ability to self-regulate in times of stress in order to stay calm enough to make the right decisions and choices. And so, I'm actually going to end halfway on time, but I think we would love for any of you to come to our blob meetings, which we need to schedule another one soon, and start putting some things into place about what we can do, how we can meet the needs of our community and our kids. So thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this a lot. Thank you.
I would just draw your attention to something that we can already do, and that is in our bulletins. It says the Buhler Grade School PTO is planning a back-to-school event Sunday, August 11. That coincides with the parents' meetings with the principal and the teachers, and they want to bring the kids together, play kickball and play games, and they just need some older adults and also youth group members to just play with them as a part of mentoring and just being together as community. That's part of that networking work that she talked about in resilience. And secondly, I just remind you too, and this sort of blows my mind, but did you know our school system has a homelessness liaison? That's a position, homelessness liaison in Buhler. Her name is Cindy Couchman, and she does quite a bit of good work. But the fact that we have a position for that is telling as well. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Continue to pick her brain. Continue to invite her to other places to talk to. Talk to our teachers, support our teachers, and there'll be other occasions to do more of this work. Come back and worship at 10:30.